The oil filter is this yellow canister here. Just need to unscrew it, put the new one on. You really just need to get it loose. And then you can do it with your hand. A good way to get it loose, there's a couple different strap or plier style oil filter wrenches. Now you can just spin it off. You're going to want to make sure you have a catch pan underneath. You may have drained the oil, but there'll be some oil still in the filter connector, and you don't want to have to clean that up. We're going to put the new filter on. Screw it back on once it touches, then just turn it a little bit further, and that's all the seal you need. Make sure you have a good seal. There should be some oil still coming off the connector. Put some oil on the gasket. That'll make sure it stays wet. You get a good seal. Once it's touching, you really don't need to do more than half a turn. Just use your hand to tighten it. That's all you need to do. So I do think we're going to change the oil pan gasket.
Before we pick up the engine to remove the right side engine mount, we need to separate the right side exhaust manifold from the catalytic converter. We do this to make sure that when we pick up the engine, we don't stress the exhaust system. If you separate the flange and make sure it's below the stud bolts, then you know the engine can be picked up and it won't pull on the catalytic converter. Before we move up top to pick up the engine, we want to remove the two engine mount nuts that are on this subframe here.
The right engine mount nuts on the bottom have been removed. Now we remove the engine struts, and we can pick up the engine enough so that we can take the right engine mount off. This will allow us to take the oil pan off. Okay, I've raised this just enough. I know the engine is free of its mount holes. So now I should be able to take the engine mount bracket off and get that out of the way, and then take the pan out. This is what it looks like underneath. The side engine mount is free of the front of the subframe. These bolts are no longer in the hole. So now I should be able to take the bolts above that attach this engine mount to the motor, get it out of the way, and then we can take the pan off. I wanted to show you guys. So I'm getting leverage on this wrench to break the engine mount bolts free. Gotta have a offset wrench so that you can reach in there and you can loosen these. Once they're loose, it's really not bad, but breaking them free can be difficult. This is oil pan level sensor. You want to make sure you remove this before you bring the pan down. I got the oil pan out. One small problem though. I used the pry bar to separate the wrong part of the pan, and I bent the shit out of the pan. So I guess I'm gonna go get another pan. Remember, you want to separate the pan from the gasket so the pan can come down, because then you can take the bolts out for the oil fill. The oil fill is in the big hole. This is the new gasket. It has a raised lip. And what's supposed to be able to happen here is all you need is only you need silicone on the corners. And otherwise it'll just make the seal. So this is the gasket that was, I swear, was glued to the existing pan, but I think that might have just been because it was OEM. So when we put this on, we'll put this on first, and then we need to put the oil pickup screen on, and then we'll put the oil pan on. For the most part, it's just getting in there and getting the bolts loose, feeling your way in there. But I wanted to give you my lessons learned on how to change out the oil pan gasket effectively. So these are the tools you're pretty much going to need all these variants for this to work. Some of them are nice to have, but certainly nice when you're under the car by yourself. There's an upholstery pry bar. It has two bends in it and a forked end. This is nice for getting plastic and any plastic insert mounts out of there with minimal damage. If you do it with pliers, you break them off, but this seems you get a good leverage angle and minimal breakage. Along the way, when taking stuff apart, you probably need to pry some stuff. So you're going to want a pry bar such as these, as well as when you're reinstalling the bolts, if you push the engine mount bolts in with the pry bar against something, then you can actually get it started in the hole, as otherwise you don't have enough to get the threads started. I have my magnetic parts pickup. If I drop anything either out of my reach if I'm under the car, or if it's just in a bad spot. the engine mount is this U-shaped piece of metal. I had to remove the air compressor for air conditioning to get at the last bolt on this side. There's 2 on this side. And then there's 3 on this side of the U. To get at them, I had to remove the oil filter and the oil pressure sensor. That's the thing with the green plug. Doing that gave me the right access angle to break the bolts free with the offset wrench. And then, I was able to drive with 15mm socket. Depending on where everything is laying for you, you might be better served with a flex head or a straight socket driver. Same thing with a short or a long socket. Part of the variance is how high you can lift the engine, how the car is sitting if you don't have the car on all 4 jack posts. Several factors. So getting at these bolts was the most difficult part. I broke them free with the offset wrench. And once they were broke free, I got the top front bolt. I was able to get it with a socket, pull it out real easy. I literally ended up having to use all these tools. So this ratcheting box end wrench, I needed a little bit of an angle to get at the front, the bolt on the bottom closest to me on the right hand side of the engine here, right hand side of the car. And then I was just able to ratchet that free. The last bolt is deeper in, and I had to get at it with a wrench that could reach it from the bottom to get into there. And then you notice this is not a flex head ratcheting box end wrench because it kept flopping on me. Yours might be stiff, but I've used mine and they're not stiff anymore. So get this up in there. Actually, to make sure I didn't break the box end wrench, I got it broke free with this end, with the open end. And then I put the boxing ratchet on there and just ratcheted it till it was almost out. And then I lost ratchet return. So then I put the pry bar up in there to make it tight, so then I could ratchet to get that last little bit off. When putting this back together, that bolt was one of the hardest bolts to get in there. So what I ended up doing was put the bolt head into the ratcheting box end, and if you could figure out, there's a way where you can have it in the box end and you can put it up in, and then you can get the bolt where it needs to be to get started. But you don't have enough leverage to push the bolt in. That's why coming from the wheel well, you push on the bolt into the bolt hole in the engine block. You can push in enough that you can ratchet it, get it started. And then you can just ratchet it all the way and then tighten it with something else. You don't really want to tighten it with the ratchet box end. But that's eventually how I got the bolts in. It was hard figuring out where the angles to get it out. But it was even worse trying to put them in. This is good for for the oil pressure sensor, I had enough reach with these larger locks channel pliers to loosen it. Also, you need to get the bolt holes to line up. So I put one bolt in this side of the engine mount. And once I had it in there, I had several turns in. I used this to pry up on the engine mount and jiggle it so I could find the bolt hole for the outside top engine mount bolt hole. So I got that in there, I got that started, then it was easier, it was pretty easy, everything else just lined up. To put the other bolts in on this side, they're all more difficult. So at this point, I have the new, I ended up having to do a new oil pan, a new oil pan gasket, and I would save yourself the time of playing with RTV and get, if you get FEL-PRO calls it perma-dry, the oil pan gasket is a separate tray that you saw. It goes on first. So oil pan gasket tray, oil pickup tube, and then the oil pan. It's a lot easier if you get the perma-dry gasket because all it needs is RTV in the four corners, and you stick it up on there, and then you just put the other pan on. And you don't need any other silicone sealant. I really don't think you're going to get the bolts free unless you have an offset wrench, so I would go get a 15 millimeter. This is 70 degree. There's a couple different options, but this reached really good for me, especially with 12 points, to get in there to just get it started. Because it's such a big thread, once you get it good and started, you can do it with your finger. If you get two fingers in there, you can get the bolt. And everything's going to go a lot faster if you have that ratcheting box end. So I hope that helps you guys if you end up needing to do oil pan or oil pan gasket on a GM 3800 Series 2 front-wheel drive car.